Hey guys, I am back, and this video is going to be one that has been highly requested, highly anticipated. Alright, well, maybe highly requested and sort of moderately warmly anticipated. I don't know. Today we're going to talk about different knife steels. And the thing is, you got to remember, this topic is huge. There are literally, no exaggeration, like 100%, thousands, absolutely thousands of specific individual different types of steels out in the world that can be cut, forged, formed into a knife blade. So that's one of the reasons it took me so long to actually make this video. I just struggled trying to figure out how I would even put this video together. And I've spent time trying to format it in my head. I've actually made spreadsheets, I've made Word docs, I've made PowerPoints. Like, if I was going to brief this to my unit, how would I do it? And I just got lost in all the details more than once. So here's how I figured out that we're going to do this. You can see I've got some knives in front of me because we're going to be looking at them. We're going to be looking at examples of some big picture overview in this video, okay? And then what I'm going to ask you guys to help me shape the more specific next video as we go through this. So to put it in military terms, because that's the only way my brain can actually function, this is the strategic view of knife steels. And then with your help, I'm going to go into the tactical picture next time. And if that makes no sense to anybody right now, I am not at all surprised, but it will hopefully by the time we're done with this video. So in this part one, we're gonna big picture, we're gonna talk about the major categories of knife steels and what they are. We're gonna talk about the chemical compositions of knives, of blades, of steels, and those ingredients that go into them and how they kind of change the things around. The properties of steel and how those go into classifying the different steels, and why that's important. When you're picking out a different steel for what you want. A lot of people are like, "Hey, what's a good knife?" And my question is always, the first question, what are you going to use it for? And then after we've kind of gone over all these big picture topics, then we'll move on to some more specific stuff later on. So big picture wise, what is steel? Steel is a ferrous material, is iron with added ingredients that allows it to function as a cutting blade. Now, of course, we can cut with lots of different materials. It doesn't have to be steel, but what makes steel special are the specific properties that allow it to be hard, tough, hold an edge, be shaped into that knife blade shape that we want, and allow us to refine that blade once it's made, to resharpen it if anything happens to it. And those are not properties that we can assign to all those other potential cutting implements out there as we talk about it. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can approach and attack this particular problem that we look at when we're like, hey, let's talk about what is knife? How do we there's different ways to organize the bunch, is what I'm saying. The way that I like to do it, starting off, and I think the way that most people do it, is we look big picture at two major groups, and of course there are other classifications, but you start with carbon steel and stainless steel, specific to knife blades. And guys, I cannot possibly fill in all information, okay? If you want to take some metallurgy classes, it will blow your mind how much the human civilization has discovered and invented about metals and stuff. It's just amazing. But when we're talking about knife blades and making cutting implements, we can start off. Not we have to, but we can start off by splitting our blades into two big picture categories of carbon steels and stainless steels. Okay, so on this side here, we're going to be looking at some stainless blades in a little bit. And the first thing I want to talk about is the misconception that lots of people have that stainless steel means like stainless as in unable to be stained. It will never corrode. It will never rust. I want you guys who don't have the knowledge already to think of it, split into two words: stain less. It will stain less, but it does not mean it will never stain. Stainless steel will rust and corrode and degrade under the right conditions. It's got some ingredients in there that help it do it less than others. Just like we call these carbon steel, but just because we call these carbon and we don't call these carbon doesn't mean that carbon is not an ingredient in the stainless category. Without elements of carbon, you would not be able to harden and make a blade that will hold an edge over time and stuff like that. So, we give them names to separate them into categories based on properties and chemical elements, but that's just like lesson number one right off the bat. How are they really different? Well, yeah, a stainless steel is, big picture terms again. I'm going to be making a lot of disclaimers and caveats because I don't want someone to come back and say, you said, So your stainless steel category is really good for situations, environments, uses where your big concern is the durability of your blade in regards to corrosion and rust and things like that. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that you can't have a blade that's really good at both wear resistance and corrosion, okay? But I'm saying that that's where the true strength in stainless steel lies. That's its family tree right there is about being able to be tough in the face of things that would make other metals rusty and corroded. Okay, carbon steel is really a great choice. It's really good for applications where you need a blade that will retain its edge and have a certain not toughness but hardness over time without you having to perform maintenance on that blade with regards to the edge, and you're not in an environment where you are so much worried about the corrosion problem. Either you have the means to take care of it, so you don't mind doing that kind of upkeep, or you're just in a dry environment where the corrosion threat is not present. And again, I'll say it again, it does not mean that you cannot, for your particular individualized use, it doesn't mean you can't find a blade that is a certain level of corrosion resistance and a certain level of edge retention all in the same package. We start there, and as a user, as an individual, you then find the one that works for you best. When you talk about a carbon steel, what makes it a carbon steel? Well, it's the carbon content, and here's the crazy part. If I were to, and we talk about percentages of materials, there's specific chemical content that goes into it. It doesn't take a lot of carbon in your blade to make it a carbon steel. And the numbers I'm going to throw out here might really surprise you. 0.05 to 0.25%. That's all it takes to be considered in the carbon steel neighborhood. That's not a lot. It's less than 1%. In fact, a good solid carbon steel billet is, a heavy carbon steel is somewhere between 1 and 2% carbon, which I think is probably going to blow a lot of people's minds, because a lot of people are thinking, and I know this from talking to them, carbon steel must be a very high percentage of carbon. If you had something with a huge percent of carbon, sure, it would be very hard, but it would also be incredibly brittle. It would shatter very, very, very easily. And the chemical composition is a tightrope walk that we're going to talk about later on too. Everything has to be in just the right proportions. So that carbon percentage is not very, very big, but a very specific amount. And those molecules during the heat treat process line up in a very specific way to provide what we're looking for in a carbon steel blade. This is a 1095 carbon steel blade. You'll notice it's got a coating on it. And you'll notice, I don't know if you'll be able to tell, around where I lasered and the coating is gone, all around the edges, there is some rust forming on there, okay? But you're not gonna see the rust anywhere where it's coated. I was gonna see a good amount, but most carbon steel blades of whatever type come with some kind of coating on it. Whenever I do unboxings and we get carbon steel knives, you may notice there's always some kind of oil on it because it is a much higher corrosion threat than a stainless steel knife. It needs to be taken care of. And a high carbon steel knife, if you leave that out, and I've done this, I've left it out in the rain overnight. Less than 24 hours is all it takes for you to start getting surface rust. Leave it out there for a few days, up to a week, maybe a week. You'll start getting that deep pitting corrosion that even if you manage to buff out all that actual rust and corrosion, that blade will never be free of those pits and those scars again. It's in there. So it's no joke when you're dealing with the corrosion factor and carbon steel. If you're wondering why I seem a little bit slow on the speech today, I am very, very tired, and I apologize for that. I finally thought of how I was going to do this video, and I really want to get it done. My absolute favorite carbon steel is a European steel. It's been around for a long, long time. 80 CRV2. And it's not a very commonly used one, but it is an incredibly strong, amazing steel when it comes to edge retention and hardness. Now, this is the Jacare Pucco from Verustella. I think I pronounced that right. I can't be entirely sure. I love this knife. I have a whole video where I took a look. Somebody sent me the 140. This is the 110. I thought the 140 was just a little bit long. This knife the steel is incredible. I love this steel. It's one of my absolute favorites. It holds an edge like nothing I've seen, but when left untaken care of or uncoated, it will rust like a mofo. But take care of it, and you can do almost anything with it and not worry about that blade losing its edge. It's just fantastic. I'll put a link probably at the end of this in the end screens to the unboxing where I compare it to both the Army Air Force survival knife and the Spec 2 version of that. It's a great knife. There are some ultra high carbon steels out there, things like Maximet and Crewware, where the carbon content is up all the way at like 1 1/4 to 2%. I think I said a high carbon content before, but those are considered like ultra high carbon. The threat with that is that we talked about before, too high a carbon content can make your blade really brittle. And that's just the nature of carbon, the element. Think about something like ceramic. And a ceramic blade will hold an amazing edge, amazingly sharp for an amazingly long period of time. If you were to just drop that blade, though, it will shatter like a plate, and that's the risk you run with too high a carbon content. And that's why you can't let your carbon content get too high. High carbon steel, and when we talk about carbon steel blades, for the most part they're usually in that high carbon steel neighborhood at 0.6 to 1%, and that's going to give you a very, very rugged knife, very good properties for the things you use a knife for that you would want a carbon steel knife for. But at the same time, you're not giving up too much in the way of a blade prone to chipping or things like that. Okay. In between carbon and stainless, we have a family that is known as alloyed steels. Alloyed steels, I don't want to muddy the waters too much. There are actually several categories of steels that blend the combinations that we're going to talk about, between carbon and stainless. For right now, I'm really just going to leave it at carbon and stainless. Alloyed steels combine elements of one or the other. So there are stainless alloys, there are carbon alloys. They just add different compounds to increase specific properties. So you might have a stainless steel that you want a better wear resistance on that you would get with a standard formula. You might have a carbon steel where you want increased toughness. So you will find a series of alloy steels there. High-speed steels. The big thing about high-speed steels, they use them a lot in the kind of industrial applications where you need metal tooling to make other metal objects. The whole reason that we can use a blowtorch on certain metals to make it look all kinds of pretty colors is because that metal has a much lower tolerance to heat than other metals. The high-speed steels, one of their key properties is that they have a much higher tolerance to deformation and effects from heat. So they can, we'll talk about some other properties later, but so they survive that. That's also one of the reasons that they do make, some of them anyway, some very good knife blades. Some of those other properties, not necessarily the heat resistance, but wear resistance. The abrasive and adhesive wear resistance associated with high-speed steels can make an excellent, knife blade and certain things. So, again, I said at the beginning, I can't cover everything in one video. I can't. But just know that just because we're talking about these two primary groups doesn't mean there's more stuff out there, and it doesn't mean we aren't going to talk about it later on. So transitioning over to the stainless steels. The big kind of family tree factor, the joining thing, the DNA of a stainless steel is chromium content at the level of 11% or higher. And chromium is the element or the chemical additive composition, whatever you want to call it, that starts, it's like the jumping off platform that builds in that corrosion resistance for our stainless family. There are other elements that we can throw in that we'll talk about in just a little bit that can increase our corrosion resistance, but that chromium is sort of that's the base level. That's where we start with. Two of the major additives that also are often applied to stainless steels to help them stay bright and shiny and pretty. The first one is nickel, which should be familiar to a lot of people. Who hasn't seen a movie where either General Patton or some pimp on the south side of Chicago pulls out a shiny handgun with pearl or ivory handles on it? Okay, so nickel plating not only makes something look really shiny and pretty, but nickel plating is an amazing way to keep something free of rust and all kinds of corrosion. So when you take and you add 8% nickel into your steel mix, it has the same effect for your knife blade. Molybdenum is another element that you can throw in there, and that protects against that pitting corrosion that we talked about with the carbon steel, where if you leave it on the surface and it eats in, that kind of helps prevent any surface rust from getting in there and causing that pitting corrosion eating into the metal. There's a list so long of all the different stainless steel formulas and all the different ways that different people, different companies, and individual inventors have come up to arrange molecules in the world to make knife blades stay rust-free and shiny. It's ridiculous. And, believe it or not, some of them are almost the exact same thing with just a different arrangement of different atoms. I mean, like ATS-34 and 154CM is really almost the same steel, different chemical composition, but I mean, it's the same properties and everything. And we see that a lot in the steel world. One company will come out with a steel and it'll be trademarked, and another company will want to produce something to compete with it, and they will come up with something with the same physical properties as that steel, different chemical composition, different chemical properties, but it will meet the performance of the same thing. And I mean, it happens all the time. So, speaking of properties, by the way, so I brought these knives not only to kind of toys in the video, but here's the cool thing about the different steels, and these are all different steels. So this is a relatively higher end. It used to be a lot more high end, but this is S30V. S30V has an excellent edge retention. It has excellent corrosion resistance, moderate difficulty in resharpening, we'll say. Okay. This is Nitro V. It's kind of a relatively new thing. Little less corrosion resistant, very good edge retention. I find it pretty easy to resharpen when you need to. This is Chinese alphabet with a fingerprint on it. Hold on. I can't remember specifically which Chinese alphabet steel this is. Does it say on there? I don't remember. Oh, this is one of those famous Chinese knives that says it's D2, but it's not. It's like 8CR13 or something like that. And this is VG10, which is an excellent stainless steel. Very good. I mean, very, very good corrosion resistance. Very good edge retention, and pretty moderate, I'd say easy to moderate resharpening capabilities. But the thing is, even though these are different price ranges, different types of steel, if I didn't tell you what any of them were, and assuming you didn't know the knives yourself, would you really, just looking at the steel, would you be able to tell what was made of what, and you know, which might be higher end than another, which had the quote-unquote fancier chemical mix? Or if you had a task to do, forget the task, invent a task in your mind. Which one is better for that? Which one would you want to carry? Which one would, I mean, that's the thing. That's why knowing a little bit about the steels and knowing what they're made of and kind of the different properties is a good idea. It's a good thing to know. Because honestly, the steel looks like steel. I mean, it just, if you don't kind of have an insight into what it is, I mean, I personally, if I was going to pick one based on looks, I really like the way the very much most cheapest knife in the bunch looks like. I think that is the nicest look. This is the absolute cheapest in terms of price and quality out of all of these things. The most expensive one is right here. I don't even think Wilkins is producing these things anymore. And I can tell you for a fact that everything he makes is tooled one at a time. He's got a small workshop. He's got exacting standards. Every batch is small run. This is probably not only the most expensive thing here, but the highest quality right here. Certainly doesn't look as pretty as that and as finely finished as that. The steel on this is a lot better. Would you be able to tell anything just from looking at it, though? No. You know what I mean? You get a sense of what I'm saying? So, understanding that when you look on it and you see D2, I mean, just assume it, I mean, pretend it really is D2. Well, now you've got this D2, which is technically an alloyed steel, but really we usually just count it as a carbon steel. And we've got this S30V blade. Okay, so now that I've got these two blades, now which one do I want for a specific task? You know, and which one is better than what, and blah, 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 blah. So it's valuable to have the information and to know it. Okay, so we already talked about some of the elemental ingredients that go into it and that really form the DNA of the specific knife. So let's finish talking about them. Let's go over the specific ones that we haven't talked about and maybe touch on some things about the ones that we already did. Carbon, number one. It is the most important element that goes into hardening a knife blade. Chromium, we touched on already. Okay, chromium is one of your main corrosion fighting elements, which is good. We want that, right? However, too much chromium, also just like too much carbon, can also decrease the toughness of your knife. So we're still walking that tightrope. Did I say tightrope? I think I said tightrope, but I meant tightrope. Just like we are with the other elements in this. You want just enough to give it a high corrosion resistance, but not so much that you end up with a brittle knife blade. Cobalt you'll find in a lot of knife blades. Okay, cobalt will strengthen your blade. Cobalt will pump up the toughness and also the hardness. And that's interesting because toughness and hardness are usually opposite ends of a spectrum. You usually, by increasing one, you're decreasing the other. So it's really interesting that cobalt in varying amounts can have an effect on both of those things, which is just like, why even have rules if nature's just going to break them? Copper is an important element. Copper can help combat corrosion, but at too much of an amount, it basically is just taking away from the strength of the blade in the fact that it is pushing out other elements that could be having more of a beneficial effect on everything else. Manganese hardens the blade. Just like other stuff. So hardening the blade is good, as we'll find out in just a little bit, but we talked about that spectrum. Hard and tough. Okay? If you make something too hard, your toughness goes down. So you don't want it too hard because adding too much manganese to make the blade harder will reduce its toughness. Molybdenum that we spoke of before, it can help us avoid that whole pitting corrosion type deal. It can also help maintain the blade's steel at high temperatures. So wouldn't be surprising to find out that tool steel and high-speed steel has extra amounts of that in it too. Nickel we talked about. Okay, nickel does that cool corrosion stuff, helps us add toughness. Nitrogen can sometimes replace carbon in certain steels. I'm not even going to touch that. That's a whole different kind of thing. Nitro V steel, I'm not even going to get into it. And then phosphorus, again, improves strength as well. Now, there's all sorts of other, different companies have their different proprietary blends. Again, I've said this before, there are so many thousands of different steel formulations and recipes out there. And the big steel companies have like these graduate level people with, PhDs in metallurgy and chemistry full time on the payroll who do nothing but work on developing new steels, like all day, every day. That's what they do. So sometimes they're just improving products they already have. Sometimes they're trying to come out with like a new breakthrough product, but the steel race, you don't hear about it in the news. It's always there, though. They're always looking for the next better, lighter, tougher, stronger steel, for whatever the application happens to be. Okay, so after we discuss all of these different elements, right, and adding this to the blade and that to the blade, we get certain physical properties built into this steel billet, the rectangle of steel that we are now going to turn into our blade through whatever method it's going to be. And different process. I'm going to take this time now, before we get into that, to say that no matter what were the physical properties introduced through our chemical content, the key thing, a very key thing, and I have said this, and Dragon Forge has commented on so many videos and said this, and some other people too. Matthew Shannon also, home knife, I shouldn't say home knife maker, but home forge knife maker. Your heat treatment for that blade is everything. You could have the perfect chemical composition without the right heat treatment. I say without the perfect heat treatment, you might as well just have a bar of frozen butter in your hand, because what you're doing through every step of your heat treatment, which is it's not just one thing of like make the knife glow and then let it sit. It's a process through every step of the initial heating the blade up all the way to your last cooling it down. You are physically rearranging the molecules in that bar of metal. You're aligning them the way you want them to be to make them assume these properties that we're talking about. So you're actually physically changing the metal during your heat treat process, which I think is pretty cool. So it's not just a factor of, put all these chemicals in a bowl, shake them up, and we've got a knife. It's more than that. Okay, so now that we've got our blade all done, we've mixed up our chemicals, we've got it all sorted out, we pounded out our billet, it's gone through heat treat, we've got our knife, we're ready to use it. Let's talk about the properties that we're going to have. So the first one is going to be hardness. And most of us know that this gets expressed in Rockwell hardness, or RHC. There's good people out there that somehow think that bigger is better when it comes to RHC, that somehow just blanket statement, the higher your number, the better it is. But what have we already said about a knife that is too hard? A knife that is too hard is likely to have a lower strength, which results in a brittle blade, which means it is likely to shatter or chip or whatever it happens to be. Okay, so now we're moving on to toughness. Now, I might have made it sound like toughness is just the opposite of hardness, but it's not exactly. What I hope I got through to you is that a knife that has a super high hardness is likely to break. Not because the hardness is too high, but because when your hardness is too high, it reduces your toughness. Breakage, chipping, and all that is not technically a function of having your knife too hard, but of having a knife that is not tough enough. It just so happens that when your knife is too hard, it reduces your toughness, if you understand that math equation. We're talking about toughness, we use the term sudden loads. That's a dirty thought in your head. But I guess it might be a little confusing that I use the whole example of chopping and things like that when discussing hardness, which I really probably shouldn't have, but toughness and hardness really, they go together. A lack of toughness in your blade results in physical breakage, whereas the lack of hardness results in deformation of the blade. They just have a direct correlation to where an over increase in hardness results in a decrease in toughness. But they're both things you definitely want to take into consideration. Next thing we're talking about is wear resistance. And wear resistance then can kind of connect to edge retention. And there's two different kinds of wear resistance that we want to talk about, and I think I mentioned these both. There's adhesive and abrasive. A great example of adhesive wear is the old sticky lock scenario from frame locks, where you have a titanium frame lock and a steel blade, and what happens on a microscopic level is you have a little bit of a fusion of particles between the steel and the titanium. And when you break that sticky lock, you end up dislodging microscopic pieces of the materials on each other. And slowly that wears down the steel on the blade, on the lock face, for example. And that's adhesive wear. Abrasive wear, well, that's really easy. All you got to do is think about sandpaper, and harder particles are moving over another. Wear resistance is very much affected by the hardness of your knife, but also just as much by the chemical composition, because some are just more prone to resist that. That's why some steels are so much easier to work with and are easier to machine than other steels. When you design a steel to be more resistant to wear and tear, it's harder to turn into a knife because by nature, it doesn't want to be messed with and stuff like that. The next property is corrosion resistance, and I think we all understand what that means very easily. It resists those external factors that would cause it to oxidize or be susceptible to any other form of corrosion that might be out there. Humidity, moisture in the air, salt, all that stuff. And then finally, we've got edge retention, and that is exactly what it says. That's the ability to maintain that cutting edge throughout its use. I mean, simple enough. So I think most people that have studied the whole subject would say that your edge retention is a product of wear resistance and your hardness. that's where RHC kind of becomes a prime factor. A higher RHC, of course, is likely to equal a better edge retention, but we have to factor that in again, that you don't want your RHC too high, because then that makes that same edge you're trying to retain brittle and likely to chip under the wrong circumstances. So it's all a balancing act. There's all a big balancing act. Now, some people also want to throw in things like ease of resharpening. You make an edge that is too tough, and it is very hard for some people to maintain it. The edge will lose its sharpness if you use it over time. It will. Sooner or later, that edge will wear down. People's minds are blown when I say one of the things that will wear down your edge faster than almost anything is cutting through cardboard, and they don't get it. They're like, but this is metal. This is a paper product. How does it happen? And then I have to explain, listen, we're talking physics, and we're talking chemistry, and we're talking molecules, and it just so happens that the crystalline structure of cardboard is arranged in such a way that it is a tough challenge for the molecular structure of a steel edge. It's one of those weird science things. In the military, one of the things, somebody said, hey, can I borrow one of your knives? The first question I'd ask, and I'd say, are you cutting up a cardboard box? Because I'd give them a cheaper knife. You know, I don't count ease of sharpening as one of the big properties of a knife blade. Because really, when you're discussing hardness, toughness, and all that other stuff, edge retention, you are by default discussing the process of putting that edge back on. You've already discussed it with everything else. But so to me, anyway, that's like the big picture when you're discussing a knife blade. You know, now that we've covered the big picture of all that stuff, now you can say, okay, so with that in mind, I want to talk about what makes M390 different from S30V, or I want to talk about what makes Chinese alphabet steel different than 420HC, or what is the difference between M4 and D2, and things like that. But, you know, you have to understand, when we say this is better, and I hate the word better or worse without context, because it's like almost meaningless, but when we talk about specific knife steels, now we know what we're talking about when we go into what family does it fit in, what is it made of, what is it used for, what is its properties. So I've done my first part. Now, for everybody that's been wanting this video and has asked it, I'm willing to put in the time in a part 2 to talk about each and every individual specific steel in comparison to its contemporaries for all of you. I do not have the physical, emotional, or mental energy to go through all 526,600 individual types of actual steel in one sitting. So, here's the deal. You guys in the comments, just list the steel that you would like to see. Just put it in there, and I'm gonna leave this open for about a week. Okay? You just tell me. You don't even have to make it a full sentence. Just type a steel type you would like me to cover, kind of in depth, and specifically in the next part of this video. Now that we've gone over the big picture. So, like I said, we've done the strategic view. Now we'll do the tactical view. On specific steels. If I have a knife in that steel, I will bring it into the video so we can look at an example of it. And I have one from a lot of different types of steel. But this is almost interactive. Almost interactive. Maybe I can even, how's this? I will make the next one live so that as I'm going through, you guys can ask some questions if you want. You know? Cool? So I hope this has maybe shed some light, and I was lucid enough, even though I'm tired and my sleeping has not been great. If I have said anything to those smarter and better educated than me, and you can fill in some information or correct something I have said that is boneheaded and stupid, please do. I welcome it with no hard feelings, because I certainly don't want to put out bad information to anybody. Thank you guys for watching. I can't wait to see what all your different requests for different steels are. As always, you are all absolutely awesome. I appreciate every single one of you. I will, on Instagram and Facebook and through a little tiny blurb on here, I will let you know when the live stream to do the part 2 for this is, okay, in the coming week. And I will be back again real soon.